Urgent. The front is cracking, the Russian army is bogged down, Putin's meat grinder is devouring its own. Russian forces are on the verge of collapse. The Ukrainian Armed Forces are advancing, the enemy is losing everything. The thunder of Ukrainian weaponry, the Bogdana self-propelled artillery tears the occupiers to pieces. The Ukrainian cannon destroys the world's second-largest army every day. Priest spies. The Russian church serves the Kremlin in the heart of Europe. Shocking details are blowing up the internet. Tyranny at its peak. Putin has surpassed the repressions of Soviet times. All this in our episode of Hellish Point. Russian propaganda fakes are falling apart. Ukrainian breakthroughs are destroying Kremlin myths. The Russian army is stuck. The front is bursting at the seams, and moreover, the Ukrainian armed forces are breaking through the line of contact. Russian troops are burning. The Ukrainian armed forces are advancing. The enemy is losing everything. The collapse of the world's second-largest army. Putin's meat grinder is devouring its own. Watch the hellish footage from the front right now.
The Ukrainian Armed Forces have liberated most of the village of Tovste in Donetsk region. It was brought back under Ukrainian control thanks to the coordinated actions of the 5th Separate Heavy Mechanized Brigade. This was reported by the Operational Strategic Group of Troops, Dnipro. And our defenders from the Lazar unit, which is part of the 27th Pechersk Brigade of the National Guard, have turned $40 million worth of Russian equipment into scrap metal. That is the estimated value of the enemy's S-300V surface-to-air missile system. The National Guard reports that the complex was struck by a drone 30 kilometers from the front line. Its destruction has undermined the enemy's ability to protect their positions and equipment from our forces' strikes. At the same time, the Russians have also made gains in the area of the Serebryansk forestry, according to deep state analysts. According to the General Staff, there were 157 engagements along the entire front line over the past day. In the Pokrovsk direction, our defenders repelled 43 assault actions by the aggressor. A double strike. For the second time this month, the unmanned systems forces have hit the Unecha oil pumping station. It is located in Russia's Bryansk region, near the Russian-Belarusian border. This facility is the largest hub in the Druzhba oil pipeline network. It belongs to the Transneft and Product Holding and is involved in the military-industrial complex of the aggressor country. Additionally, Russia uses this pipeline to pump oil to Hungary. And the local foreign minister, Peter Sijarto, is already claiming that with such strikes, Kiev is allegedly trying to drag Budapest into the war. A naval drone from the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine eliminated 5 elite Russian divers. During operations in the Black Sea, one of the strike naval drones broke through to the port of Novorossiysk, where Russia keeps the remaining large ships of its Black Sea fleet. Due to the effects of electronic warfare, the naval drone lost contact with the control center and began to drift. After some time, the local Russian command gave the order to retrieve the drone from the bay for examination. Elite reconnaissance divers were sent on the mission. During the attempt to lift the drone, it detonated. All 5 were killed. More details in numbers about Russian losses on the battlefield. In the past day, they lost 790 soldiers, 46 artillery systems, 110 military vehicles, 4 tanks, and 3 armored vehicles. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the occupiers have already suffered over 1,074,320 killed and wounded, more than 11,124 tanks destroyed, 1,472 multiple launch rocket systems, and 1,210 air defense systems. The occupiers' air fleet has been reduced by 422 airplanes and 340 helicopters, while their naval forces have lost 28 ships and boats as well as 1 submarine.
Nearly 3.5 years of daily battles, artillery shelling, drone attacks, and thousands of casualties. But the result, if you look at the map of hostilities, speaks for itself. Moscow, which boasted it would take Kiev in 72 hours, has, after 1,010 days of bloody fighting, captured less than 1% of Ukrainian territory. These are the conclusions reached by deep state analysts.
Starting from November 12, 2022, 108,651 square kilometers were occupied as of that date. As of today, it is 114,493 square kilometers. The enemy has occupied 5,842 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. This amounts to 0.96% of the total area of the Ukrainian state within its internationally recognized borders.
The Russians have indeed achieved significant operational successes. But that was during the first weeks of the invasion, when Ukraine was physically unprepared to face what was once the world's second largest army, which was simultaneously pushing forward on all fronts. At that time, the enemy managed to capture Kherson, Mariupol, and parts of the Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy regions.
Everyone realized that they needed to start digging in right away. At the very least, after losing the Kharkiv region, the Russian Federation clearly understood that you can't secure victory just by staying on the move. Well, from their side. Want to hold your ground? You have to dig in. And all this digging in, all these positions, they leveled out the major problems that existed at the start of the war. At first, Russia broke through our defenses in a massive way. Then Ukraine pushed the Russian Federation back, and after that, everyone shifted to more or less positional combat. Dugouts, trenches, forests, tree lines. And that's how the fighting is conducted now.
But subsequent counteroffensives by the Ukrainian Armed Forces pushed the occupiers back by dozens of kilometers, turning the tide of the war. Since November 12, 2022, the front has stabilized. Russia still continues its attempts to advance, but not on such a large scale anymore. The enemy assaults the positions of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, hoping to seize at least a bit of Ukrainian land. Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Kupiansk, Chasiv Yar, Robotyne. Thousands of attempts to storm the trenches, but the advances are minimal, sometimes 300, sometimes 500 meters. Hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers have been lost, but the strategic situation has hardly changed. Now the enemy is conducting offensive actions, mostly of a local nature. Pressure, exhaustion, destruction of infantry and equipment. However, the Russian dictator is unable to capture significant territories.
Despite those losses, and his losses keep growing, every kilometer and every position he seizes costs him more and more killed and wounded each time. The statistics bear this out. First, the pace of his offensive has slowed down significantly. Second, the level of losses is extremely high. Yet they are still trying to achieve the goals they've set for themselves with such confidence.
They lack resources, they lack strength, and they lack opportunities. All those things they bragged about so much before the war turned out to be nothing. Why has there been a purge of generals in the Russian Federation? This is dictator Putin's revenge on all the military generals who, for many years, convinced him that our weapons had no equal. Everything is ready, everything is great. But as it turned out of this entire out of a million-strong army, only about 170,000 people were actually ready to fight at the very start of the war. That's it. The rest were not ready. There was no proper communication, no equipment, no sufficient ammunition. None of that was there. Everything had been sold off, everything had been stolen. And now this massive revenge, this huge punitive machine that is punishing generals for this deception, once again shows that the Russian military machine, in essence, is just a puff of smoke. Yes, there are people, yes, there are determined allies like Iran and North Korea. But the Russian Federation itself cannot handle Ukraine.
Ukraine is already definitely the winner in this war. Even under conditions of shell shortages and the aggressor country's superiority in manpower and aviation, Ukrainian defense remains resilient and the Russian successes are far less than what Kremlin propagandists claim. Their soldiers are being wiped out on the front lines by the tens of thousands. Equipment is burning on the battlefields, and entire armies of the aggressor are being destroyed under the blows of the Ukrainian forces.
Under the cover of a possible ceasefire, the Russian army is actively moving columns of armored vehicles, tanks, and manpower to the front. Judging by the published videos, the occupying forces' equipment is moving toward the Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions. According to military experts, it is precisely there that massive assault actions by the Russians may take place in the near future.
Right now, the degree of implementation is far from, let's say, the planned objectives, thanks to the heroism of our defenders. But as for pieces of territory, you could say, let's exchange these pieces of land. We will completely leave the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. Then you please hand over to us what we have written into our so-called constitution. There, pieces of Donetsk, parts of Donetsk, half of Donetsk that remains, about 30 to 40%, half of Kherson, half of Zaporizhia region. That's the kind of conversation that could take place.
The Russian dictator is also pressuring Ukraine on the diplomatic front. Despite not having any significant successes on the front line, Putin still does not give up hope of grabbing more and more pieces of Ukraine for himself.
He wants to trade a pause in the war, in the killings, for the legalization of the occupation of our land. He wants to seize territorial gains for the second time already. He was allowed to take Crimea, and this led to the occupation in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. He did not receive any preventive punishment when he gathered his forces on our borders. This resulted in a full-scale war and the occupation of even more parts of Ukraine. Now Putin wants to be forgiven for seizing the south of our Kherson region, Zaporizhia, the entire territory of Luhansk, Donetsk, and Crimea. We will not allow Russia this second attempt to divide Ukraine. Knowing Russia, where there is a second time, there will be a third. That is why we stand firmly on clear Ukrainian positions.
If Putin does not want peace, he must be made to want it. That is exactly why Ukraine and Europe have presented their own plan to end the war. As the Wall Street Journal writes, the first stage of any settlement must be a ceasefire. The plan also states that any exchange of territories is only possible on a mutual basis. That is, if Ukraine withdraws its troops from some regions, Russia must withdraw its troops from others.
First, there must be an honest end to the war, and it depends precisely on Russia. It is Russia that must end the war it started. Second, Ukraine and all its partners equally recognize the need to cease fire, to stop the killings. There is only one party opposing this. That is Putin. His only card to play is the ability to kill, and he is trying to sell the cessation of deaths at the highest possible price.
At the same time, as Western journalists report, European officials insist that any territorial concessions by Ukraine must be backed by strong security guarantees, including the potential for Ukraine's membership in NATO.
What is needed is not a pause in the killing, but a real and lasting peace. Not a ceasefire sometime in the future, months from now, but immediately.
And while the truce has not yet come, the armed forces of Ukraine continue to drive the occupiers from our land by force. According to the Institute for the Study of War, the armed forces of Ukraine are counterattacking and have been successful in the Kupiansk direction for the second day in a row. According to geolocated footage published online, the armed forces of Ukraine recently repelled enemy attacks and advanced to the southwest of Kondrashivka. At the same time, in a report the previous day, analysts stated that the Ukrainian side had also advanced to the southwest of Radkivka, which is north of Kupiansk. In addition, our defense forces have liberated and completely cleared the settlement of Besalivka in the Sumy region. According to the General Staff, the operation involved units of the 33rd Separate Regiment and the 24th Separate Assault Battalion. As a result of the operation, the enemy suffered significant losses. Meanwhile, the occupiers are close to semi-encircling the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad agglomeration, military analysts report. In the Rudinsky area, the enemy has advanced a solid 4 to 5 kilometers. The main fighting is currently taking place near the railway on the Dorozhne-Rodinska section.
Geographically, the military formation is not yet encircled, but the logistics have been practically cut off, and bringing anything in or taking anything out is already, well, it's becoming impossible.
The Russians also tried to break into Pokrovsk itself. Out of 150 occupiers, only about 30 made it to the city, but even they failed to achieve any results. However, military experts do not rule out that the armed forces of Ukraine may be forced to leave the city if the occupiers' pressure does not ease. However, for now there are no such preconditions and our defenders are bravely repelling the enemy's assaults.
If it turns out that, due to the evolving circumstances and the strategic situation, we are indeed compelled to evacuate and leave the city of Pokrovsk, then allowing our military forces and troops to remain in this specific urban area for an additional period of 2 or 3 days or even an entire week, only to then execute a subsequent withdrawal, would not be strategically sound or justifiable in any meaningful way. Over the course of a year of fighting near Pokrovsk, quite a lot of enemy manpower and equipment has been destroyed, so to speak. One could say that Pokrovsk has already fulfilled its military mission several times over. So let's approach this calmly. In war, sometimes you have to retreat in order to move to other positions where it might be easier to hold the defense. No gates are being opened there, nor are there any open spaces where the Russians could make significant advances. Nothing of the sort.
But even for the residents of Erefia themselves, over there beyond the curb, things, to put it mildly, are not going very well. Russians, like Ukrainians, are getting used to living under constant shelling. But unlike the Russian army, the Ukrainian armed forces strike exclusively at military targets, not at civilians like Putin does.
And As we delve deeper into this fascinating subject, it's important to consider all the intricate details and various perspectives that contribute to a comprehensive understanding of the matter at hand.
Last night, unidentified drones attacked the Saratov region. Russians are widely complaining about explosions and a fire in the regional center in the area of the local oil refinery, which became a legitimate target for the drones. Oh God, help us! What should we do? We spilled the fuel. According to Russian media, a whole series of explosions went off over Saratov and Engels last night, about 8 in total. Russians claim that air defense systems were supposedly operating and flashes were seen in the sky. However, the burning refinery is clear evidence of the poor performance of the occupiers' air defenses.
It was incredibly hard to endure there. It's truly messed up in that place. Oh my God, this is just so incredibly messed up. It's unbelievable.
Temporary restrictions on the arrival and departure of aircraft have been introduced at Saratov airport. In addition, the governor of the Russian region announced the threat of repeated drone attacks.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
The first Ukrainian self-propelled gun has proven its power. The Russians are fleeing. 100 shots every day. The latest Bogdana self-propelled artillery turns Russian positions to ashes. This weapon strikes mercilessly. The occupying forces are burning under the blows of Ukrainian artillery. How does the Bogdana burn the occupiers? Watch right now.
We've taken up a firing position and now we're going to work it.
Fire now!
This is how the Ukrainian self-propelled Bogdana operates. This is the first Ukrainian self-propelled artillery system developed to NATO standards. Caliber 155 millimeters. Its baptism by fire was in 2022 during the battle for Snake Island. In 2023, it was officially adopted into service.
We receive the coordinates from unmanned systems. If, for example, they saw someone there and it happens that either something happened to them there or the target just happens to, well, just disappear.
In motion, right? Yes.
Well, but we all do our part equally. We all run to the cannon, stand up and aim.
Dimitro, a soldier of the 44th Separate Artillery Brigade, works as a gunner. His job is to aim precisely at the target.
The commander gives me the order. I have to check everything, set the level, aim at my aiming point, and enter the exact numbers they give me.
He says he is satisfied with the work of the Bogdana. In emergency situations, 2 or 3 people are enough.
It works quite well, how to say, not bad at all. In fact, it performs exceptionally well.
And what about the targets? Do you hit ones?
Yes, different ones. Well, now, before it was, yes. Before there were more mechanized assault ones, so yes. And now they're less like that. They're, as they say, infantry targets. Well, there's less equipment involved now.
155 millimeter caliber, which most NATO armies have adopted as a universal standard. It is believed that this caliber successfully combines range and destructive power.
Do you really have enough ammunition for the gun for it?
For the distant targets we're working on, yes. Well, of course, we could use more.
Dimitro has been fighting since the first days of the war. He says he's motivated to defend the country because it's his home, Ukraine.
Then tell me, who are you defending?
My family, my children, my wife. For example, I consider it my duty.
The soldiers say they're supported by thoughts of the future and a peaceful country after the war.
Well, thoughts about the future. You think that the war will end and that's it. I'll be home building a house. You could say, only with faith in the future.
Based on materials, Ministry of Defense's TV and radio studio Breeze, Olga Chatailo, Ilona Koval, Fakti ICTV, United News.
Holy lies. GRU agents of Russia in cassocks and all over the world at that. Clergy of the Russian Orthodox Church are spying in EU countries for the Kremlin. Here's how it works. Russian priests set up their churches near NATO countries' military bases, gather information, and pass it on to Moscow. See more details in the following report.
The free operation of the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine is one of the Kremlin's demands put forward by the Russian dictator at the meeting in Anchorage. One might think that Putin is concerned about the interests of his flock, but that's not the case. The churches of the Russian Orthodox Church are closely connected with the security services, and they serve as the hook by which the FSB's agent network anchors itself locally to monitor and promote its narratives. As proof, the only person Putin met with in Anchorage besides Trump was Archbishop Alexei of Sitka and Alaska.
The entire conversation is conducted in the English language.
From the very inception and foundational starting point of this comprehensive and in-depth exploration, we embark on a journey to meticulously examine and thoroughly understand the origins, initial conditions, and fundamental principles that underpin the subject matter at hand. This introductory segment is designed to establish a robust and detailed groundwork, providing essential context and setting the stage for all subsequent discussions, analyses, and deeper dives into the intricate complexities that will unfold throughout this presentation.
Icons were brought from Kirill to Alaska. What was sent from the central office with their help remains anyone's guess. The Archbishop accepts the gifts with joy and kisses them after the Russian war criminal.
I'm very, very grateful.
In the fourth year of the full-scale invasion, in NATO countries and beyond, GRU agents continue to operate under the cover of religious institutions. At the same time, analysts assure that the Russians choose the most suitable places for espionage. For example, a church in the suburb of Västerås. In 2013, this plot of land was purchased by Rosatom. The construction was approved extremely quickly by the former head of the Swedish construction party, Lars Kalseby. The facility was built until 2019 also with Rosatom's money, but officially the church officials concealed their patron. By the way, according to investigators, the Russians did not choose the location for prayers in Sweden by chance. This is precisely where the country's longest runway is located, as well as strategic bridges over Lake Mälaren, the Swedish Army General Staff in Enköping, and the military communications hub.
The Russians specifically chose this location for the church for a reason, as just a few kilometers from the temple is the Westinghouse electric plant, which produces nuclear fuel cells. The distance between them is only 4.22 kilometers. Even closer, at almost 500 meters away, there is another strategic facility, the Västerås Flygplats Airport. 6 kilometers from the church is the CHP plant and the headquarters of the energy supplier company Mälarenergi AB. And at almost 5 kilometers away, there is the metallurgical plant ABB Metallurgy.
The abbot of this church, Pavlo Makarenko, was caught by Swedish investigators receiving a letter of appreciation from the Foreign Intelligence Service for his cooperation. Previously, the priest was the CEO of a Swedish company owned by the Russian developer Gerasimov. Gerasimov, by the way, owns a whole series of so-called church projects in Sweden and was also involved in a drug trafficking case. The church in Västerås is as closed off as Russian military facilities. Only one parishioner agreed to speak with journalists, but even she was quickly silenced.
Do not get involved in politics. We accept that this is all. We see this now. Bland.
Don't speak.
Important infrastructure and military facilities, government institutions, and a high concentration of embassies. Journalists analyzed dozens of ROC churches in Sweden, Norway, Finland, as well as in Ukrainian communities across Europe. And everywhere it's the same scenario. The Russians choose simply ideal locations for surveillance and organizing sabotage. For example, in the Czech Republic, right next to the ammunition depot where Russian special services carried out sabotage in 2014, there are 2 ROC facilities. However, there is only one precedent when local authorities shut down the activities of the Russian church on their territory.
In the city of Turku, since 2002, there had been a functioning church of the Dormition of the Most Holy Mother of God, and the abbot was Hegumen Nikita, who was close to Gundyaev. Alex Stanislavich, a man of good character and expert in church law. In 1997, he worked in the Department of External Church Relations, and in 2000, he was tonsured as a monk by Metropolitan Kirill. This church was closed by the city authorities of Turku on August 1st, 2022, due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, since nearby were the coastal fleet base and the command of the Finnish Navy in Turku, the city mayor's office, the regional state administration of southwest Finland, and the consulate general of the Russian Federation in Turku.
But even after the church was closed, the priest found himself a cozy position in Stockholm. But the practice of expelling propagandists in cassocks, who often refuse to express their opinion about Russian aggression in Ukraine and are frequently, and not without reason, suspected of working for the intelligence services, unfortunately has not spread beyond Turku, Finland, throughout Europe and Scandinavia. Hundreds of Moscow's eyes are closely watching everything that happens there.
Thousands of victims, dictator Putin is breaking the record set by Soviet leaders. The number of people convicted in Russia on political charges in just the last 6 years of Putin's rule has surpassed the figures of the USSR, the times of Khrushchev and Brezhnev. In Russia, thousands of people have been thrown behind bars in handcuffs simply for criticizing Putin. Shocking details. Watch right now.
Insulting the president's morals. How Russians are punished for disrespecting Putin. In the past 6.5 years, nearly 400 people have been prosecuted for criticizing the president and mocking him.
To persecute Russians for insulting the man in the bunker, law enforcement uses the administrative article on petty hooliganism. Words like putler, criminal, or a portrait of the bunker dweller with a mourning ribbon are enough grounds for hefty fines, starting from 30 and reaching up to hundreds of thousands of rubles. Or even arrest you for 14 days.
This is a totalitarian regime. Essentially, this is a repeat of the personality cult, the cult of Stalin's personality, which Putin models himself after. And you know, the entire architecture, the whole power vertical that Putin has built, that's why the regime is called Putin's. He is interested in glorifying himself, Putin.
Since the start of the full-scale war, the number of cases concerning insults to Putin has increased several times over. According to Verska's calculations, Russians have paid at least 11,556,000 rubles in total. Hundreds of law enforcement officers and government officials are working to protect the image of the bunker czar.
The thing is, he doesn't even read social media, so he won't even see this. In fact, unless someone prints it out and brings it to daddy, he won't know about it. The real impressing issue is that the security forces themselves, specifically the state apparatus and the military establishment, all these powerful and influential institutions, are deeply interested in making absolutely sure this doesn't happen, that there is no offense whatsoever or any belittling of Vladimir Putin's significant and established role within society, ensuring his continued authority and public perception remain unchallenged.
At the same time, anything at all can be qualified as an insult. The security forces punish not only for evaluating Putin's personal qualities, but also for criticizing the dictator's policies or comparing him to war criminals. For example, the popular Russian performer and leader of the rock band DDT, Yuri Shevchuk, was fined 50,000 rubles under the administrative article for discrediting the Russian army.
Family, friends, that's not a president who needs to be constantly coddled and kissed. Homeland is a poor grandmother at the train station selling potatoes. That is what Homeland really is.
No less important is the fact that Russian law enforcement is eagerly assisted by Russian informers and Putin supporters. Yes, in one of the Russian schools, for writing "Putin is a thief" on the board, a teacher threatened the students with execution.
Our president, who was deeply offended yesterday by a children's playground, and for which in Soviet times one would have been executed. I have spoken with all the teachers regarding your class and insist on holding a meeting with your parents.
At the same time, 400 lawsuits for insulting Putin do not reflect the real picture, since the system only imposes fines for relatively harmless statements and pranks. Those who truly wound the ego of the Kremlin psychopath face the death penalty without trial or investigation. Litvinenko, Politkovskaya, Nemtsov, and Navalny.
Vladimir Putin would have voted for Yanukovych. He is Vladimir Putin, just so you understand.
That's all from me for today. This was me, Victoria Panchenko. Even more scorching news from the front in our next episode. Well, for now,
don't forget
to subscribe and hit the like button. See you